Good evening, freedom fighters, and welcome to the Indie Scot News Midweek News Roundup, where we're joined by two North-East Seditionists, Mair and Teresa Dufficy.
Hello.
Hello.
So basically, we've got quite a lot to go on about this week. So we're going to miss Boris altogether because he's not worth talking about, and we're going to talk about other things. Well, Mark came up with an idea that earlier. You kick off with that, Mark.
I was going to say, was it oil? That was what I was going to talk about. Yeah, I think it's interesting that we've got a situation in Europe now where it looks like Russia and Ukraine are possibly on the brink of conflict, and I can't think in a time, certainly in my lifetime, since the end of the Cold War, where energy security is such an important, or should be such an important thing. And here we've got Scotland sitting on with a wealth of, albeit a carbon-based fuels, and we really shouldn't be in this position where we should have energy security. We have energy security, but we just don't have the will with our the people in Holyrood or Westminster to exploit that. I know that's maybe controversial in these green times, but
Teresa.
Well, I came to Aberdeen way back in the 70s, 80s, and I've seen how it goes up and down with the oil. But there's a strange feeling just now going on. It's like we know the world should be moving a bit more to renewables or whatever, etc. And they keep speaking about this just transition. But from what I see, and I speak as a citizen, sometimes it doesn't actually come out like that. For just now in Aberdeen, there's a public park that they're wanting to use as an energy transition zone, but the residents aren't very happy. It's in a poor area. It's been great during COVID. Folk are out and about. The wetlands actually depollute some of the toxic stuff coming off a landfill site above. There's wildlife there. So yeah, is this going to be the oil companies sort of, I don't know. There's a funny feeling going on just now anyway. And there's a concern for jobs. And of course, then there's been the whole seabed stuff and the Crown Estates. So that's caused a bit of a talking point in Aberdeen. In fact, the place Tory in Aberdeen is being covered now by Canadian newscasting and etc. They've been over here doing programmes. So it's fairly picked up on the radar.
I think it's interesting, actually, what's going on in the Tory is that it's local activists, again, grassroots activists that have raised the concerns about, which, let's be honest, it's essentially a land grab of what is currently a public amenity. And, Sir Ian Wood, a man who, a man with his own personal oil fund that doesn't think that Scotland should have had its own oil fund, is largely behind that. So, but I guess the point I was trying to make there is it shows you the power of local activism and being able to raise that and actually get some international coverage because of it.
Absolutely, and they're doing well. And I think Tory as an area, it's lost its beach to it's looking like an industrial harbour. They've now had an incinerator plonked right next to a school. They lost their academy. They lost a primary school. So it does feel like it's turning into the industrial hub of, and also when the oil first came to Aberdeen, Fitty was spared the fishing village, but on the other side in Tory, you might know that, Mark, better than me, they lost a lot of those old fishing cottages. So I think there's issues going on in Tory, and it is a vulnerable community. Everybody thinks Aberdeen's rich and wealthy, but you go to some places, and I think sometimes it's even harder when you're living in a city like that, sitting cheek by jowl with, between the haves and the have-nots.
I think going back to the energy thing, you can go on about the world's going a certain direction, but you can't leave it on the ground. You can take some of it out. You don't need to burn it. You can use it for plastics, and you still get decent money for that, and that will fund your green revolution. And the bottom line is, at the end of the day, you'll get there faster. You'll get there faster by investing the oil and the green technology, and then not having to buy it off of the other countries that are way ahead of you.
Well, that's it. I mean, until if we stop it now, we're still going to need oil. We're still going to need gas. And I think it's a complete paradox to say that we would import it from Russia or Kuwait or you know, or wherever, where we have got it, you know, surely exploiting what we've got in our own waters is far less of a carbon footprint, far less destructive than, you know, than importing it and having to have it shipped in. And not only that, you know, you're at the mercy of geopolitical events like
Absolutely.
well, maybe we might see, hopefully we won't see with Russia and Ukraine. So another opportunity missed.
I know.
Okay.
And all that carbon capture project of the northeast coast that didn't get very far, because I think Bojo was after humouring the red wall, or whatever you call it, up north of England. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just like history repeating itself in many ways, what's happening to Scotland now. Asset stripping.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And unfortunately, this time it's been aided and abetted by the government and Holyrood. For the life of me, I will never, ever understand. I mean, I know Nicola Sturgeon's a bit off her head, but God, Patrick Harvey and government, I mean, she will never live that down. At the end of the day, I see that the police are still going on about the missing £600,000 a day. That's still going ahead. That is going to be forgotten and at one point, and they'll go. In fact, Harvey's probably going to end up in the jail before it's all over, allegedly. Anyway, let's move on from that, and then let's move on. Have you anything this week, Teresa, you'd like to bring up? I know you've got a few things close to your heart.
Well, a few things. In Aberdeen, where we've been meeting mostly electronically, we've done some outside things. We've done the bridges, etc. But folk aren't so keen in COVID. You know what I mean? We have done partaking in Business for Scotland events and got booklets out, etc. So we're asking our members about meeting up in the real world soon enough and planning a bus to the Arbroath rally, because we were really disappointed 2 years ago. That was the first one cancelled. So that's good. It keeps folks' spirits up, and hopefully start our street stall up again in April. Hopefully, I've just noticed though the deadline, you know, we're trying to get folks signed up, register to vote and postal votes and all that sort of stuff. And we're going to be we're really good because we've got members of all political parties involved, but everybody's committed to independence. So it'll be, this is the system, this is how it works. These are the parties in your area supporting independence. Away and make your own mind up, sort of thing. Because you kind of have to be, we're Camogie. With a different hat on, I'm involved a lot in the sort of women's stuff that's going on. So yeah, we've kind of kept that separate. So with that in mind, I'd like to show you my t-shirt. Women vote wished. And that's certainly causing a lot of interest. We have done some street stalls. Can I just say the majority of the public are very supportive. Most don't know what it's about, and you tell them, it's like, really? Yes, this is what's happening. It's the only time in my life doing street stalls I've had the police called to us, not once but twice. But then we just show them the Equalities Act, where we're supporting the 9 characteristics, which includes folk with a gender reassignment certificate. So it's just people being a bit mendacious, actually. And we're just a group of women dressed as dinosaurs or whatever, just engaging with the public. So that's been good. Yeah, so there's things happening round about that too.
Yeah, the wee bit of hassle with one of your things with somebody else, the Aberdeen, who was taking photos of you across the road.
Oh yes, that was quite interesting. As Aberdeen with Craig, we had a demo. There was one, I think there was a few demos, definitely one in Edinburgh. We decided we'd do one in Aberdeen via Aberdeen. So off we went, and we had some placards and had a wee speech and things. And then we noticed, shall we say, I think he's an SNP staffer now, an activist from Ain that was across the road taking photos of us. And I thought, what's that about? It was really strange. But it turns out, I think maybe Mark, you mentioned it. You shouldn't really, isn't that against GDPR if you're...
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, you can't just go around and, you know, surveil people.
Yeah, it felt like...
you know, so, you know, dangerous to do that.
Yeah. And it's good to see that Craig's taken his case further. And while I was down the road, I went along a couple of times. I was there when he came out of prison and that. So It's not the Scotland I recognise these things happening. I really don't.
No, it's starting to get really messy, and I noticed Joanna Cherry's she's been in the papers almost every day this week with something else, so commenting on legal stuff, and so it seems like there's going to be a lot of legal stuff happening shortly. I believe.
Is that fair play for women? Is that?
No, it's a Scottish one.
For Women Scotland.
Yeah, for Women Scotland.
Yeah. The funny thing about this, Dave, is these lobby groups get funding from government, our taxpayers. They get money to employ people who then go and lobby the Scottish government for what they want. And your average punter like us who aren't happy about it, we've not only paid our taxes to facilitate that, we're now paying to crowdfunders to stand up and challenge this. It's just nuts. It's the stonewallization of the Scottish government and our society.
I think when you look at the, as you mentioned there, crowdfunding, when you're having to crowdfund initiatives to hold the government to account, because the lines between the judiciary and the government and the legislator have been blurred so much. I mean, that's, these are serious problems. This is the tin pot dictator style of government. So there's something fundamentally wrong there that needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, I don't see it getting fixed with the current leader and cabinet and Holyrood.
Well, I've noticed that some crowdfunding things seem to work very well. If you look at what Led by Donkeys have managed to achieve in England, basically with an idea and some good crowdfunding, and they are doing mega stuff now.
The Led by Donkeys thing is brilliant. They've obviously got some good money and good brains behind it, but we're already considering if this fair play for women court appeal today about the census, and they took the English government, or should I say Westminster, but the census is devolved, I think. They took them to court last year and won. Scottish government are trying it now, so fair play for women are currently with Roddy Dunlop QC, who seems to be playing a blinder these days. But if that gets knocked back, there's a precedent. The suffragettes mucked up the census 1911. Who thought we'd be here again? You need accurate records to plan services, and it's only a form that is anonymized. It's much less invasive than the school sex survey, shall I say, which folk are rightly up in arms about.
I mean, one of the things for me that it highlights is that, it's the need for, in an independent Scotland, to have a written constitution that puts some of these topics that are so fundamental to how society operates, that they need to be put beyond the tinkering of politicians and whatever fashionable thinking happens to be.
And judges who are acting like politicians.
Yeah. If you think about it, one of the first things that Alex Salmond did was to depoliticise the position of the Lord Advocate, and unfortunately, the one who replaced them did. One of the first things she did was to reverse that. So that was a red flag that maybe we didn't pay enough attention to when it happened first.
Well, I said at the end of the day, Alex Salmond took 24 hours to change the executive into a government, and Nicola Sturgeon spent 7 years turning it back.
Sadly. But quite interesting, all the things happening in Scotland, hate crime bills, self-ID, all these other strange things that you kind of put your finger on. Where did that come from? I mean, I go on this Women's Declaration, and part of it, and each Saturday they've got speakers from around the world on Zoom calls, and it's the same story everywhere. In fact, the likes of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they're a few steps ahead. And it's, for want of a better term, it's queer theory. It's invaded and it's snuck around all these institutions, particularly universities. There's big money. This hasn't come from grassroots. No. And it's damaging, I think, to the whole of society.
It's big pharma. At the end of the day, they have to invent new diseases and new patients all the time to keep themselves going. But as I say, I think I've noticed that the last wee while that England actually seemed to be pulling back from it a little bit, and that'll make things just a little bit uncomfortable for them up here if they want to go ahead with it, because apparently they like the Four Nations approach and everything else.
It's a sad day when you look to somebody like Liz Truss for support.
I know.
I've no quite got there yet, Mark. I'm not saying it'll never happen, but I've not quite got there yet.
It's a dark day when that happens.
Well.
Or maybe it's a weird reinvention of the poll tax. Inflict it on Scotland first. See how
but this is self-inflicted. This is what I don't understand, you know.
Well,
it's even worse, you know.
Wales is the same.
Yeah.
It's just gone bonkers.
I'm going to say a wee thing. I wasn't going to say anything about it, but it really pissed me off. Since 1967, I've been a Raith Rovers football supporter. I've been to over 1,000 games, and yesterday, Raith signed a rapist, and I am absolutely sick of it, and I will never set foot at Stark Park again, because anybody at all who says that that's a footballing decision, it's not a footballing decision, it's a money decision, and anybody at all who's involved in that should be sacked right away. That's my wee rant on there.
I can't disagree with any of that. You know, it's a strange one. I think it was Tom English had said the other day, you know, do you lose your sponsorship, you lose your moral compass, you lose fans, you lose all of this for what? A guy that's going to get you 10 goals a season, who's got an absolutely horrible background. It's just, it makes no sense. It's
to be fair, they did get rid of Al McDermott.
I know, and you think about these footballers, for right or wrong, are role models for young kids, particularly boys growing up. What does that say? You know, to impressionable kids, that's okay. Well, maybe not, but you know what I mean? Not that everybody's to be squeaky clean, but it's not a good role model to take on. They should have really thought this through. Apart from that's even beyond the thing that I was really angry too, but I just think it's stupid and insulting, and actually quite, I don't know, I'm not a Raith Rovers fan, but it's interesting that you're a fan, Dave, and you think like that, because they interviewed folk on the news and some folk think, I'm not bothered as long as he gets goals, and I'm like, what?
I didn't realise you were a Raith fan. I did actually sponsor a Raith player many years ago when I had my business.
Do you remember who it was?
I can't remember. I've got the shirt somewhere. It was the chairman at the time was coming under a lot of pressure from a certain quarter in Scotland, and for a bit of moral support, I got my company to sponsor one of your players. I was around about 2012. You can maybe draw your own conclusions from what was happening around about then.
I was another thing is something else that's interesting. Apparently, the trans umbrella has expanded even further to take in furries, who are people who dress up as animals to have sex, usually with a tail hanging out of a butt plug at the back of them. Now, these are people who are going to be allowed to go into women's safe spaces, like shortly, with more rights than a woman, when actually they should be going to the litter tray.
Well, I hate to say it, but a lot of this is fueled by the massive expansion in porn. It's just gone, obviously, with the internet, but there's various things they could do about that. But the amount of violent porn, the sissy porn they call it, the animal stuff, it's horrendous. It's gone.
It seems to have gotten, my view on it is that it seems to have moved on from just objectifying women to dehumanizing women. Yeah. And I think the likelihood is that we end up creating a generation of misogynists that are going to be far worse than what's gone before. I
think we're getting there already.
Yeah.
Or even a group of young people that can't even relate to real people. I think it's Japan or Korea, they're having virtual girlfriends because they can't cope with real ones, and it's just bizarre. It's like it's all part of the dehumanization of us and all that transhumanism you hear about. It's concerning. It makes you wonder. It's almost like, see the old films with these mad doctors doing their social and medical experiments. It feels like we're part of that. Who'd have thought it?
Yeah, funny you mention that. I can actually see Patrick Harvey working on the island of Dr. Moreau.
I don't know. Can he have a green overcoat like we can flash people?
What's happened to him anyway? You never see him.
He's keeping himself undercover.
Why?
Basically, because I think he's been overshadowed by his lady friend. Assuming she is actually a lady, I wouldn't like to misgender her.
I did hear a rumour the other day that Patrick Harvey was maybe in line to replace the late Molly Weir in the Flash adverts. I don't know if there's any.
Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me.
Well, the English Greens, have you heard this week as well that the Scottish Greens have voted to disassociate themselves from the English Greens, because the English Greens actually voted for a woman who's strong on women's sex-based rights to be their convener or whatever it is. Oh, she's really good as well. So they've all gone in a huff to dissociate themselves. And I noticed the guy, I can't remember his name, something Ali, who was running for co-convener.
Yeah.
Just seen that he's putting up a crowdfunder to challenge some of the stuff that's going on. And it's very strange. It's just like the party that says climate change, it's all in the science, can't even understand the basics of biology.
Exactly.
It's the. I was saying that to somebody the other day. We've got to the strange situation that there's so many things that are fundamentally wrong with society. Poverty in all shapes and forms. There's massive issues that need to be tackled, and yet somehow our elected politicians are allowing. I wouldn't even say it's the tail to wag the dog. It's a single hair on the tail that's trying to wag the dog successfully. And I'm scunnered. I just don't understand how we've got to this situation.
Well, do you know something, Mark? It's cheap and easy to tick a box saying, I'm progressive, I've changed the law to let this. It's much more difficult to tackle poverty, drug abuse, all of those social problems.
And God forbid independence.
Aye.
An incumbent government, an SNP that would be interested in independence.
I was going to ask you guys, do you think this is like history repeating himself with, is it Robert Cunningham Graham, who co-founded the Labour Party over 100 years ago, whatever, and one of their tenets was, apart from socialism, home rule for Scotland. And then after Ireland went its own way, was it 1922, the Labour Party drew back from home rule, so Robert Cunningham Graham got fed up and went off to establish the prototype of the SNP. Do you think we're back there? Is this history repeating itself? Hope not.
I hope we don't have to wait for another 100 years. But if we were going to follow Ireland and basically send 100 folk up to the post office steps in Edinburgh, make a declaration, know that in 3 years you could trust the SNP to actually do what Sinn Féin did, I would do it. But at the end of the day, there is more chance one of these parties actually grown up a cervix than there is in Nicola Sturgeon calling a referendum in 3 years.
Well, there's still folk hanging on and believing, but I don't
Well, this is maybe anecdotal, but all I see are people drifting away from the SNP. I'm certainly not heard anybody drifting back to the SNP.
Well, that's true.
And what was once a disparate and yet at the same time very unified movement has got fractures in it that I never thought I would see, and I would never have thought that the source of those fractures would be from the SNP. It's curious times.
But it's not sustainable, is it, Dave and Mark, to carry on kicking the can down the road?
Well, the end of the road is coming up very shortly. Basically that's it. Brexit will have bit. Everything's going to be. If we cannot get out now, we're not going to, because what happens at the minute, we've still got the energy to fight this. We've got the energy to take on the SNP, half the yes movement, the Scottish Tories, and the UK. And we've got to go through them all just to get your sovereign rights as a sovereign Scot.
Yeah.
And it's completely honest. People seem to forget. I mean, I know Kenny McCaskill's talking about this constitutional convention. Thing is, he's talking about putting the MSPs on it. An MSP has got less rights than you've got or I've got. Because at the end of the day, they're subservient to Westminster under the 1998 Scotland Act, whereas we're not.
It's really interesting you say that, because I've been chatting to a couple of folk from the SSRG group, and my interest was piqued, because remember Joanna Cherry and what's his name took the prorogation to court.
Yeah.
I read the documents behind it. Oh my God, it went on for about 80 odd pages, and some of it was a bit technical. I couldn't believe it. Declaration of Arbroath was mentioned several times, the sovereignty of the Scottish people, the claim of rights, 16, was it 88 or 89? All these things matter. And I think, really, whenever do you hear the SNP now saying the people are sovereign? We are. And I just think they've just given away our sovereignty, and I feel bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you replace a QC that's taken on the British government and beat them twice in the courts, and replace her with a drama student, I think, surely I remember when the SNP were all about the best people, the best qualified, the most able, the most experienced to fill those roles, and now it's just it's farcical. It's leaving your best striker on the bench.
Well, interestingly enough, through some of the women's activism, I'd say most of the women that have got involved have been independent supporters, because they've been a bit more clued up to politics, haven't been involved in that, so you see things coming quicker. But some of them, really fine, could laugh, voted no, and it's I had a wee chat with some of them about it, and they were pretty unanimous. It's the sort of Scotland that Nicola's portraying that really don't like. However, if it was somebody like the equivalents of Joanna Cherry, who they're very obviously same issue, they're supportive of her like there, and it was quite interesting. So it's not just the independence thing, it's that the nature of the country. And we'd all just assumed, because we're probably all a bit left wing, that it was bound to be this really nice socialist equality place, but it's getting painted as something completely different now.
Well, not if Pete Wishart and Alan Smith are in charge.
No. How do you feel? I mean, I know how I felt when I wised up. Is I think the longer people leave it, the more upset they're going to get. But maybe they're just going to live in the land of hope.
I think there's a couple of things in it for me. It was the treatment of Joanna Cherry, but it was also that freedom of information inquiry that showed that no planning had been done in 4 years. I mean, we have got the weakest, most inept, unpopular Tory government.
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier, Dave. If we cannot make headway against what we're up against here, then there's something far wrong. We'll never make the case if we can't make it against what we should be playing here, instead of actually we're having to play our own people. Well, what should be our own people?
Yeah. Well, basically, I've been at the last 2 marches, and I said on Saturday, I mean, I said I wouldn't be going back to an all under one banner one, but I went anyway, because at the end of the day, it's like, it's more important than mowing principles at the minute to get things back moving again. And the one had been at before, when we held up the posters in front of you in Blackford, we got quite a lot of abuse for SNP people. Well, this time we turned up with a 4-foot carrot and a rickshaw, and drove it right to the full length of the march. And the SNP grassroots are coming over to us. It's not fast, but it's recognisable in a crowd, because they were also taking the piss at me the other day, saying, you have to stand at the other side of the square like everybody in here hates you. It's like, big difference from 4 weeks ago. I think the SNP grassroots are finally starting to get...
But in saying that, they'll just use, we're progressing the bill through Holyrood. That'll be their carrot. But remember poor Martin Keating's, which, I mean, I think that was over 100 grand we all chipped into.
Yep.
And they blocked. They went hand in glove with Westminster. I thought, if people aren't paying attention to that.
I think there's two things here. I think they're maybe starting to get a sense that the worm is turning against the party. I think the activists that have left the SNP, it's the ones that they've depended on for years to walk the streets and shut the doors, etc. So I think a lot of this talk, I believe, is to do with, well, one, there's an election, there's a local council elections coming up in May. So this is just the usual bit of carrot dangling and window dressing. But I think this will be telling, because I think council elections are normally quite poor in terms of their turnout. And it'll be interesting to see where the activists are most effective. And I suspect there'll be a very low turnout for the SNP, and that this might be the wake-up call for a lot more of the activists to realise they're not the only show in town.
At the moment, I believe that there are people in the SNP now who are thinking, for after Sturgeon's gone, not just Sturgeon, after Murrell's gone, after the whole dynasty's wiped out, some of the young team must have a bit of ambition, and at the end of the day, they'll be playing the game just now, going along with this GRA stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like you can't actually ask a sensible person the question, "What is a woman?" Like without getting a Michael Gove trying to basically protect Boris Johnson and the BBC. It's just talking utter shite. And it's like there have to be people in the party. There are decent people in the SNP. Actually, in Parliament, I believe that there are some people in the SNP are preparing the ground for when they go afterwards. And I don't think it's going to be the older guard. Like much as Wishart would think he's going to get in, Wishart is going to be struggling even to hold his seat. And certain people in the Alba have asked if I'd like to stand in Perthshire against them. And yes, I would.
Well, actually, it's kind of knowing what's really going on in their heads. If they just want to keep the kettle on the boil or be the admin for a devolved Scotland, it's simply not good enough. It's not in their mission statement. Their mission statement is Scottish independence and to serve the people of Scotland, isn't it? And actually, if you imagine if Scottish Labour were in charge of Holyrood just now and they were losing powers, because that's effectively what's happened with the power grab, we'd be up in arms. Independence supporters, we'd all be up in arms. So why are folk not complaining? It was 3 years ago we all went down to that hands off our Parliament demo. What happened? Oh, the people of Scotland shall not be bowed out. Oh, this is a terrible power grab. Nothing. It's just he doth protested too much and nothing happens.
Well, in 3 weeks' time, we're going to try and take 500 people to the doors of St Andrew's House. Now, as I say, there was a thing came out today that was a government statement, and it came out from that address. And as I say, we're going to try and take 500 folk up there. Everybody that's got an axe to grind against the SNP and the Scottish Government to turn up there for 4 hours and make the biggest bloody racket that's ever been done on the east end of Edinburgh. Plus, maybe also blocking off Regent Road and blocking off Princess Street by default. Not deliberately, but because there are too many people there, and there's no space because the band is for doing it. Parliament. And the thing is, most of the government are actually in St Andrew's House, and all the civil service, most of the civil service as well, most of the ones that count. So we're going to go down there. And as I say, I've said, doesn't matter whether you're an independent supporter, whether you're a unionist, it doesn't matter. If you are sick of what's happening with the Scottish Government and the way that you've been treated, join us on that day and let them know about it.
Yeah, personally, I mean, it's not like they don't have mandates to do something about it. And also, as we all know, in May, the both votes SNP, we all knew it would get Tory and Labour back in, as did they. In fact, a convener up here, when they resigned, mentioned that, saying that privately, the MPs knew that. They knew that, and the MSPs. But what could they say? Because from on high, that was a mantra. Because I think they'd rather that and keep their dibs on all the independent supporters. Can't have pesky Alex and Alba getting a voice in Holyrood, can we now? And, you know, it's very sad to see that they'd have preferred the Tories back than actual real independents supporting MSPs. Because then if we got those 2/3, I know it's going back a bit now, but if we did get those 2/3 for independence, that's internationally recognised. And it's, you know.
Whenever I see Nicola Sturgeon speaking, I keep expecting Jim Bowen from Bullseye to appear and pull the screen back and shares Alex Salmon. Here's what you could have won. Am I showing my age there now?
Or pull the screen back, find Patrick Harvey's The Wizard of Oz.
Oh no. Your heart goes out to all these activists that still believe it all, and you know.
No, it doesn't. Honestly, if anybody is still on the hook after what they have seen and heard over the last year, it's not that their evidence hasn't been there. They have absolutely negated, ignored the evidence in front of their own eyes, and at the end of the day, it's like would rather completely disbelieve everything that we can see and hear because we don't dare live without the hope, rather than actually get off their arse and start doing something about it, even if it means you have to move them off the road.
What's the phrase? It's easier to con a man than convince him he's been conned.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at the moment, I think. You know.
Assuming you'd like to call him a man, of course. And on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for coming along, guys. And I think we've had some good topics this afternoon.
Yeah.
And we've not mentioned anything at all about Boris and his wife, who was holding secret parties in the flat that he was invited to.
Well, if you get rid of Boris, you'll just get another Tory.
I would prefer him to stay. I think
Yeah.
he's a better asset for us going into the next election. So
I know, it's true, very true.
Unless he gets jailed, of course, then I would be, I'd like to see that.
He won't get the jail. All that's going on is very reminiscent of Scotland last year, isn't it?
Well, a pleasure to finally meet you, Dave.
So, Mark, Teresa, thank you very much for coming along. It's like this is where I do my puppet bit, and I'm sure I'll see you out there on the barricades shortly.
Great.